Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to today's webinar presentation hosted by the IEEE Standards Association. My name is David Stankiewicz. I'm an IEEE staff member at the IEEE Operations Center in New Jersey, as well as your event producer for today's session. I want to welcome you. As you can see on the title slide here, we have some great speakers lined up to talk about the human standard, why ethical considerations should drive technological design. This webinar is based on, recent feedback, input, and recommendations that the IEEE Global Initiative provided that led to the creation of working groups for two IEEE Standards Association projects, which we will cover today. Before we do that, I'm going to ask John to go to the next slide. Just going to go over, as we do with all of our webinars, some very basic housekeeping items, give you some information on how you can participate in today's session. Everybody who has joined should be listening to the webinar through their computer speaker system, also known as VoIP or Voice over IP. This means there's a one-way communication from us, the speakers, to you. You do not have to dial in using your telephone. There is no audio portion for your portion of the WebEx either. So you're going to hear us. We're not going to hear you. The way that you can communicate with us, though, is through chat. So at the end of the presentation and throughout the duration of the presentation, actually, we're going to take questions from the audience. Just simply look at your WebEx user interface. There should be a chat button or feature located in the upper right-hand window pane of the WebEx interface. You can chat your question to me, the host. Should pop up in your chat list as David Stankiewicz, and click the send button. We will take the questions in the order in which they are received and get to as many of them as we possibly can. As number 2 says there, I skipped around a little bit on this slide, John. If you have any technical issues, any audio issues, or you're unable to see the slides on your screen for whatever reason, also message me, David Stankiewicz, the host, and I can troubleshoot with you on the back end. So with that, I'll turn it over to John, let you guys know that we are recording today's webinar, so if you missed a portion of what the speakers are talking about, or you simply want to watch it on demand, we'll let you know when and where to find that at the conclusion of the presentation. So without further ado, I'll kick it over to our moderator, John C. Havens. John, take it away.
For all the help there at IEEE Standards Association getting this webinar set up. So hey everyone, I'm John Havens. I'm your host. I will give you some background about me, but first just wanted to quickly run through our agenda. We have about an hour for today's webinar, and after we finish this welcome portion, you'll hear a quick introduction from speakers. Then we have Konstantinos Karahalios, who's going to give a quick introduction about ethics at IEEE and IEEE Standards Association. Then we have Kay Firth Butterfield, who's going to give an introduction to the IEEE Global Initiative. We have Alan Winfield, who is the Working Group Chair for IEEE, the Working Group P7001, and we'll have some quick Q&A afterwards. And then we'll hear from Ansgar Keen and also Paula Boddington. We're very excited, both the Working Group Chair and Vice Chair of IEEE, the P7003 Working Group, are on the webinar. We're going to have any time left that we have. We're really chock full of excellent content. We'll have some more speaker questions, and then we will be done. So I'm John Havens. I'm the Executive Director of the IEEE Global Initiative for Ethical Considerations in Artificial Intelligence and Autonomous Systems, which is we also call it the IEEE Global Initiative. I'm an author, wrote a book called Artificial Intelligence, Embracing Our Humanity to Maximize Machines. And as David pointed out, we'll be taking questions at the end of each of both Alan and then Ansgar and Paula's sections, and also at the end of the event, and we'll go from there. If we can have all of our speakers in the order that we see here, followed by Paul at the end, just give us a quick 1-minute introduction each, if you would, and we'll start with Konstantinos.
So, my name is Konstantinos Karahalios. I'm the Managing Director of IEEE Standards Association, and I'm a member of the IEEE Management Council.
Thanks, Konstantinos. Kay, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Kay Firth Butterfield. Good morning from Austin, Texas, and apologies if my accent causes some cognitive dissonance here. I have the privilege of being the Vice Chair of the IEEE Global Initiative, but my paid job is as Executive Director of AI Austin, a non-profit based in Austin but working globally with a mission of responsible design, development and use of AI. In other words, a perfect complement to the work that we do here at the initiative. We have a social justice focus, bridging divides in focusing first on healthcare and reskilling workers for the jobs of the future. Additionally, I'm Senior Fellow of the Strauss Center, working with the Consortium on Law and Ethics of Artificial Intelligence and Robotics at the University of Texas.
Awesome. Thanks, Kay. Alan?
Thank you, John, and good afternoon, everybody. This is Alan Winfield from Bristol in the west of England. It's a sunny afternoon, which is great. So I'm an old-fashioned electronics engineer and professor of robot ethics, in fact, at the Bristol Robotics Laboratory. My involvement in the IEEE Global Initiative is both as the co-chair of the General Principles Committee and as the chair of P7001, which we're talking about this afternoon. So that's me. Thank you, John.
Thanks, Alan. Ansgar, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Ansgar Kuhne. I'm a Senior Research Fellow at Horizon Digital Economy Research Institute, which is at the University of Nottingham. I'm a co-investigator on the Unbiased project, which is looking at bias in algorithms and its societal implications, looking towards policy recommendations on that. I'm also a policy impact lead for the Horizon Institute, and we're on the IEEE initiative. I'm chairing the P7003 standard on algorithm bias consideration.
Awesome. Thank you. And Ansgar, when you talk later, you were a tiny bit quiet. Just so you know, we'll have you get a little closer to your microphone when you present. But thank you very much. Paula, would you mind giving a quick introduction?
Hello, I'm a senior researcher in the Computer Science Department of the University of Oxford, working currently on a Future of Life Institute funded project entitled Towards a Code of Ethics for Artificial Intelligence Research. Although I'm in the Computer Science Department, I'm actually by discipline a philosopher, and I've got a background in work in ethics in various fields, including medical ethics and various and other issues to do with the development of technology.
Awesome. Thank you, Paula. And just one quick thing, so folks know, the IEEE Global Initiative for Ethical Considerations in Artificial Intelligence and Autonomous Systems, the initiative, one of our charges, as it were, is to provide ideas that could become standards working groups. So then when people are, in this case, like Alan and Ansgar and Paula, chairs of working groups, just a quick delineation, then they are chairs of IEEE Standards Association working groups, so just in terms of terms that we use. So let me just tap on my screen. David, does everything look okay still in terms of how people are looking at the screen? Okay, I'll assume that it does, and I'm going to move on. So, Konstantinos, would you mind describing ethics at IEEE and by providing an overview?
Thank you. I'm glad to do so. First of all, I would like to welcome all the participants here. I see we have over 70 participants, and this is an offer of the IEEE Standards Association to our corporate members. And, you know, IEEE is a very individual-based organization. People from all around the world can become members. But IEEE-SA, because of its function, has also the possibility of corporate membership. And it is precisely to this group we are offering today this webinar. And from what you can see here, this is the persons and the curriculum and so on. They're very interesting. The question is why all these fantastic people come to IEEE to do this work. people like Kay or Paula or Alan and Oscar and so many others which you don't see now. Well, there is a reason for this, and the reason is probably in the tagline of IEEE. IEEE is not a for-profit. We are not a company. We are really an organization representing the integrity and the honor of our profession, of the engineering profession at large. And our tagline is to advance technology for humanity. And a very good example what exactly it means to advance technology for something which is not just technological, but something going beyond technology for a purpose. This is what we're talking today. And this is not the only thing. If we can have a look at the next slide. So the question of the engineering and ethics, or technology and ethics, is not new at IEEE. IEEE has been founded 130 years ago by Edison, Tesla, Graham Bell, and so on. And so this is a very old and revered organization. And ethics was from the very beginning at the foreground, but it was more the professional ethics. For instance, we have an IEEE Code of Ethics, there is a software engineering Code of Ethics, and there is then also the professional component, which is about the behavioral impacts. I mean, our publications are very renowned because of the very rigorous process and the criteria and so on we are applying. What is relatively new is that we deal with the ethics of technology itself. And of technology, it is about the technology development process, the application, and this is a different animal. And we are starting now a very big project also within IEEE about technology ethics in general, and the specific aspect of artificial intelligence ethics is a part of it. So it is a much broader picture and a very strong engagement of IEEE in not only in advancing technology, but advancing technology in a specific way that we can be more assured that it will serve our interests as humanity as a whole, and not the interests of specific groups only, or specific aspects like only for profit and so on. And in this context, IEEE is offering both a platform for all these great people to come together and to work with this common purpose. And the purpose is how we can, the main purpose is how we can educate and inform our profession to take into account also non-technical or functional features while creating technology. And if we achieve this, then we have made the difference. So that means we are both the platform, we set the rules of how these people come together and agree and advance the dialogue, and we're also the platform, we're the target. So this is a kind of collusion here, but I think in this case it's a positive one, which can create synergy. And if we can go to the next slide. So this is the organization within IEEE that took the initiative to create this global initiative on ethics and in artificial intelligence. And we are very known for our technical achievements. You know that we create entire ecosystems of standards, like for instance the 802 family of standards, which derivatives of which are the Wi-Fi standards and the Ethernet and so on, but also many more. We have 1,200 active standards, and we have at any moment in time we have perhaps 600 working groups working to produce new standards or to revise the current ones. And if we look at the next slide, which is also my last, we have a very rigorous process, and which is according to the WTO rules that are necessary for a standard produced to be recognized globally and so on. And we adhere not only to these rules, but also to others we have imposed on ourselves, for instance, inclusiveness, which is not part of this list. So because something may be formally open, but in reality quite closed, so we really are for open process, and we do whatever we can to make it also really open and inclusive. And we apply these principles also for the working of this initiative. So it is, they work like making a standard also for the creation of the document ethically aligned design. The ones who could follow the process, how it is created, how they get input, and the several iterations. It looks very much like a standard, although it is formally not a standard. And to close it here, this initiative really is one of the most creative collectives I've ever seen in my life. And this is not by coincidence. It is both a hot topic, and the best people in the world have come together. And in addition to the ethical aligned design, which is a great work, which may become a kind of global code of ethics, they're creating also ideas for standardization, and these ideas are fed into the formal system of IEEE. Then they escape the control of the initiative. They become really an IEEE process, which is open to everyone, and with the clear rules of IEEE. And what the initiative provides is both the initial idea, which then has to be approved by the standards board of IEEE, and all proposals have been approved. And then we find sponsors from the IEEE societies. The sponsors are not the people paying for this, the organizations of IEEE like the Computer Society or Intelligent Transportation Society or Robotics Society, who assume the governance of these standardization projects. And also the Global Initiative provides the leadership for these projects. And we are very lucky to have today two leadership groups here. I stop here because the purpose of this webinar is to hear more about these projects as an example of what is created. And these are two of the currently 7 projects, and soon there will be perhaps 10 in this field. That means an entire ecosystem is emerging in front of your eyes. And I think it would be very interesting for the people who attend this webinar to convince the organization it is worth participating, and it is open and everybody can participate. And I stop here and give the word back to John and then to Kay.
Thanks so much, Konstantinos. Really appreciate the introduction and the good level set for about how this work fits into IEEE overall. So thanks very much. Kay, I'm going to turn it to you now to do an introduction to the IEEE Global Initiative.
Thank you, John, and thank you, Konstantinos. And perhaps we could go to slide 12 so that I can show everyone where you can find more information about us, and specifically echo what Konstantinos said, which is that this initiative is open to everyone. We really value new people joining us. And so if you make a note of this website page, here you can find and download the executive summary and our report, which we created last year. And you can find out more about the actual committees that we have, which come together to create these reports. And perhaps find one that your expertise fits and that you would like to join. Also details about our upcoming meeting, which is going to be in Austin in June, the early part of June of this year. And we hope that some of you may be able to travel and join us here. So a little bit of history. The IEEE Global Initiative was created back in late 2015. And John Havens really deserves a huge amount of credit, together with Konstantinos, for really breathing life into this effort. We wanted to move beyond both the fear and the uncritical admiration of the systems that we were seeing in AI and AS, and look at what ethical values might be applied to these new tools. So back in December 2015, John called me. I was at this time, I think, the only chief officer of an ethics advisory panel to an AI company, which were, where I spoke at conferences and things like that about our work. And I think that's probably how he found me. And it's been a privilege for me to be vice chair ever since. We had a public launch in April 2016, and we have now rapidly expanding towards 200 people involved in the initiative. And our mandate can be found here. It's about the human well-being, ethical aspects of human well-being, and really our need to think about prioritization of individuals, community, societal, ethical values, and from that, everything that is to do with how we treat our planet, because we as human beings and human progress can't do terribly well without all the other pieces that we have a tendency to take for granted. So really, we want to make sure that human well-being is considered when people are thinking about the design and manufacture of AI and AS technologies. And so our mission is, that's the next slide, to ensure that every technologist is educated, trained, and empowered to prioritize ethical considerations in the design and development of autonomous and intelligent systems. And we really feel that if we can achieve this, we will ensure that we have responsible and considered design and development of these systems. And we all exist here to ensure that that comes true. How do we do that? Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have a report, and the last report came out on the 13th of December 2015. Again, you can access it through our website, our webpage, and that is a great start, but we never feel we know everything, and so we really want input from those of you who are listening and others. We are at the moment in the process of moving to a second iteration of our report, and part of that work will be done at the conference in Austin, Texas that I mentioned, which, if you can mark your diaries, is the 5th and 6th of June of this year. Please come if you can and take part in this. After that, the views of the various committees and people who attend that conference will be taken, and we will be producing a book this time, because now we have so many people, and the report will become so long and we hope very rigorous. And that will actually come to fruition in November. So look for it in November. And as I say, we don't know everything, but we will be iterating again next year. So moving then to the actual standards that we have all these in progress, and you're going to hear about 2 of them. These are really important because it's an opportunity for you to get involved and do something around ethics and AI and AS. You don't have to be an IEEE member, and you can join any of these groups. So please do. My rallying call is to get involved, and I look forward to either meeting you in Austin or meeting you through one of the committees or in the standards process. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kay. That was awesome. Really, really appreciate that great introduction. And with that, Alan, I'm going to go right to you, and then just let me know whenever I can advance your slides.
Thank you very much indeed, John. If you'd like to go to the first slide, and after that wonderful introduction from Konstantinos and Kay and John. So straight into P7001. Now, I should first explain that P7001 came out of the committee that I co-chair, which is called the General Principles Committee. And one of the principles that we very strongly agreed early in the process was that it should always be possible to find out why an autonomous system made a particular decision. Now, I've written on the slide that that's a fairly radical proposition, because I'm sure that many of you perhaps are engineers or computer scientists will understand that actually finding out why an autonomous system makes a particular decision is often not easy. Now, all autonomous systems, of course, by definition, make decisions about what to do next. So, for example, a driverless car will have to decide when to turn the steering or when to brake. A medical diagnosis AI will have to decide what diagnosis to make. Or an automated loan application AI will have to decide whether or not to recommend a loan. So why is transparency important? It's because without understanding why a system makes a particular decision, we clearly cannot figure out what went wrong, if or when there's an accident, or if the system simply gives the wrong decision. We certainly can't certify a system as safe if it's not transparent. And even more simply and fundamentally, we just can't understand why the robot did what it just did. So in short, transparency, we believe, is the foundation for traceability, accountability, and ultimately trust. And because this emerged from an ethics initiative, it follows that we believe that, and I certainly strongly believe, that it is unethical to build and, if you like, deploy an autonomous system where you cannot find out why the system made a particular decision. If you could advance the slide, please, John. Thank you. Now, all autonomous, it's clear that there is no single one way to be transparent. Transparency is not one thing. Clearly, your grandmother doesn't need the same level of transparency for her care robot as the engineer who repairs it. So our approach to tackling this problem is to break transparency down to groups of stakeholders. And here are our 5 stakeholder groups so far. So the way, essentially this is saying that the way that transparency is provided is going to be different for each stakeholder group. So if we take a care robot as an example, transparency means the user can understand what the robot might do in different circumstances. If the robot does something unexpected, the user should be able to ask, why did you just do that? And receive an intelligible reply. Safety certification agencies clearly need access to technical details of how the system works, together with verified test results. Most importantly, accident investigators need access to data logs of exactly what happened prior to and during an accident, most likely provided by something akin to an aircraft flight data recorder. And as an aside, it should be illegal to operate an autonomous system without such a system, without such a kind of ethical black box. And more generally, going to my 5th stakeholder group, wider society needs accessible documentary type science communication to explain how such system works, particularly if they're disruptive technologies like driverless cars. And John, if you'd advance again, please. And our aim, therefore, is to set out in P7001 measurable, testable levels of transparency in each of these categories. And of course, perhaps there will be new categories yet to be determined. So that ultimately, we'd like it to be possible to objectively assess levels of compliance against those levels of transparency. So, in other words, we'd like to have a range of levels of transparency for each of those stakeholder groups, from minimum acceptable levels of transparency up to the highest achievable standard. And we've already described the stakeholders. I've just outlined the stakeholders very briefly. But of course, a really important target audience, if you like, for P7001 is designers of autonomous systems. And the standard, we hope, will provide designers with a toolkit for self-assessing transparency and recommendations for how to address transparency shortcomings, or as I put it, as I describe it here, transparency hazards. Now, this isn't going to be easy to develop. We already, in the working group, appreciate the challenge that we have facing us in developing these levels of testable levels of transparency. But, you know, I just want to finish this slide by saying that we see P7001 as a kind of foundational standard that will spawn other standards, which might be P7001.1 or P7001.2, which are more domain specific. Clearly, you know, we're working at rather a high level here because the kind of transparency that will be needed specifically for a driverless car or a medical diagnosis AI or a drone, for instance, consumer drone, are all going to be rather different. But we would hope that the founding principles of the levels of transparency needed for those domains will be in this foundational standard P7001. So John, if you could go to the final slide in my short deck. Thank you. So the P7001 working group at present consists of just 12 wonderful international members from ranging from academia, industry and law. And in fact, I'm pleased to tell you that we only just appointed a new vice chair. That's Eleanor Nell Watson. We're wonderfully supported from the IEEE Standards Association by Michael Kipnis. And so far, we've held 2 meetings. The first formal meeting was just about a month ago, on the 20th of March, and the second formal meeting will be next week. I'm also pleased to tell you that we've organized a face-to-face meeting in Austin, Texas on the 7th of June. And like Kay, I'd like to invite anyone who's really interested in transparency and how we can actually standardize or form measurable standards of transparency to get in touch and join the working group. So I'd be delighted to take questions. Thank you, John.
Sure, and Alan, thank you so much for a fantastic presentation, first of all, and for leading the group, and congrats on Eleanor. That's really exciting about the vice chair. I'm going to take host privilege and ask you one quick question before we go to Ansgar, and then I'll ask anyone else, please go ahead and feel free to continue to chat any questions you have, and then what we'll do is, Alan, for both you and Ansgar, at the end of Ansgar's presentation, we can take questions for everyone. But I have one quick question, Alan, and you touched on this, but can you talk about the role of accountability along with transparency in what you're doing?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. I mean, we see transparency as, if you like, something that you need to have in order to have accountability. So in other words, accountability flows from transparency. Unless we can really understand why an autonomous system makes a particular decision, and it may, of course, be a very complex set of reasons, particularly if it's an accident investigation, only then can we start to figure out, as it were, which parts of the system are to account and ultimately who is accountable. So accountability really rolls then into responsibility too.
Awesome. Thank you, Alan. And what we're going to do, as I mentioned, we're going to listen, hear from Ansgar and Paula next for about 10-ish minutes or so, and then all the questions that we're getting, because we're getting some questions now, we'll try to answer at the end. So again, I'll just echo what everyone else has said, and that I've had such a pleasure, Alan, getting to know you over the past year or so. And for anybody who wants to have the blessing of working with an amazing thought leader in the space, I can say this, Alan, I know you're too humble to, but Alan is genuinely a thought leader in the robotics and AI and ethics space. So you get to work with him and all these other wonderful members of 7001. So I'm not above pitching it, and there it is. I'm not objective. But Alan, hey, thank you so much. And we're going to now go directly to Ansgar and Paula. So Ansgar, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, John. If you could just go to the next slide. So P7 7003, Algorithmic Bias Considerations. This was really motivated by observations of how algorithms, be they machine learning based or otherwise, are increasingly being used to support or sometimes completely perform decision-making tasks that affect people in society. And as such, there are growing concerns about whether or not there are biases in these decisions, especially since we as society have a certain kind of way of understanding how humans make decisions and perhaps identifying where humans might be biased. But if the decision is made through an algorithmic system, then we don't have an intuitive way of getting at that. So we need other clear ways of establishing, identifying, and counteracting possible biases that might be in these systems. So if you go to the next slide. So what we're looking at with this standard is to try and develop a framework to identify and mitigate what we call non-operationally justified biases of algorithmic systems. So on the one hand, algorithmic systems, I say, because it's important that it's really a factor of the combination of algorithm and data. But the other really important part here is that we're talking about non-operationally justified biases. I mean, algorithmic systems, for instance, recommender systems, or many other decision supporting kind of systems, their function is really to prioritize one thing over another, which we could call a bias. But the point is whether or not the way the decision is being made is based on factors that are functional to the particular task and that have a clear justification. We can say these and these parameters were taken into account and weighed for the decision making because they are really a requirement for doing the kind of task. What we're trying to make sure that is identified and gotten rid of is biases that are not functional to doing the task. So often these might be things that the designers of the system weren't even aware was happening, but which might potentially be violating anti-discrimination regulations, etc. So within the with this standard, we're hoping to lay down some benchmarking procedures and criteria to establish data sets that can be used to validate whether or not a system is biased, to establish and communicate the scope for which the algorithm has been designed and validated, because often it is the case that systems are designed within one context. They are tested within that context. We know that they work properly in that, but due to their great range of possibilities, they might get reapplied in other contexts. In that case, however, it's important to go back and check again whether or not the new context has now introduced some undesired, unjustified biases in the behavior of the system. So further, we want also to help make sure that the user expectations when using a system are properly managed. Often, a kind of bias that comes out of a system might not actually be part of strictly the way in which the system is working, but rather might be due to incorrect interpretation of the output. The most obvious of these being conflation between correlation and causation. Just because the algorithm has found a strong correlation between things, it doesn't necessarily mean that there is a causation, but often when people are using the system, they apply it as if it was causation. These kinds of issues would be some of the things to deal with within this. Next slide, please. So why are we doing this? Why is it important to have this kind of a standard? So really what we're looking at is to try to provide a certification-oriented methodology. So this will provide accountability and clarity around the targeting, assessing, and influencing of users and stakeholders of algorithmic systems. So something that you can, if you go to this standard, you will get a set of methodologies that you can use that will help you be able to certify, yes, we use state-of-the-art methods to try and make sure that there isn't a bias, that a non-justified bias within this system. And by doing so, you can communicate to the user that this is a trustworthy system. You can communicate to regulatory authorities that you use these tests, and therefore you've made, you've done your best to make sure that there are no unjustified biases in it. Next slide, please. So who are we looking to have involved in this development process, as well as possible stakeholders using the kind of standard that we're developing? So on the one hand, obviously, people who are involved in the creation, the development of algorithmic systems. Another important group, however, are the people, the service providers who deploy the system, because they will be closely involved in how data gets connected with the algorithms, the context within they're being used. As I said, often whether or not the system results in biased behaviors depends not just on the algorithm itself, but rather on the context and the data within it's being used. But another important group would be the regulators. We would want to have them on board during the development process so that we can clearly understand what kind of issues are required in order to meet regulatory requirements. But also there are an important stakeholder, because they will be looking at whether something that is certified under the standard also makes it something that can be recognized as not violating any of their regulations. And then civil rights organizations, civil society, basically users in general are, of course, an important stakeholder, because every one of us is ultimately someone who's being affected by these systems. Next slide. So this standard P7003 is really just getting off the ground. We're having our first working group meeting on the 5th of May. So I really hope that anybody who's listening today and is interested in these issues will join us for that meeting. Thank you. That's the last of my slides.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ansgar. And we had a couple of questions that are very fast to answer, so thank you so much for whoever asked them. People are already asking about how to join either P7001 or P7003. At the end of the webinar, I'll be posting my email address, the John Havens email address, and also you can email David Stankiewicz, who is our host. And David can also text you either of our email addresses, and we'll put you right in touch with either Ansgar or Alan. And Ansgar, and this is a question either for you or Paula. And forgive me, I think maybe it was you, Paula. You're the first person who actually gave me the idea about algorithmic bias, where we were chatting, and you said, which I thought was really helpful, that we all have bias, right? To say you want to eliminate bias in one sense doesn't necessarily make sense, because we all have bias. But like Ansgar was just saying, it's the contextual nature of the bias, or what some people might say, negative, I'm using air quotes, negative bias is what we want to avoid. Anyway, Paula, can you speak to that? Because I fully credit both you and Ansgar with making me smarter about the algorithmic bias discussion.
Yes, thanks, John. So the question about bias, questions about bias that we'll be looking at in this working group are actually incredibly complex. So they range into questions about political philosophy and discrimination of the whole notion of fairness in how we think. It's actually, the work of this group will be very closely linked to the work of P7001, because one of the questions around whether or not an outcome which looks unequal actually constitutes bias is going to be answered, at least in large part, by looking at how the decision was reached. Because, for example, to take an example, there are many employment groups where there is gender disparity between the people working. So some groups there are more men, some groups there are more women. That might or might not be the result of bias. Working out whether or not there's bias in recruitment is a very complex issue, which is obviously related to accountability and working through how things have actually occurred, but also what counts as bias in particular contexts is going to depend upon lots of the issues. For example, if an organisation has got particular duties for particular ends. So a governmental organisation would have duties towards, say, all its citizens, to act fairly towards its citizens. A company that's trying to sell something would have duties to comply with the law, for example, but wouldn't have the same duties of avoiding certain sorts of bias that a government might have. And it's also going to be very contentious to work out what actually does or does not count as bias or unfairness in particular contexts. So I would anticipate that would be one of the major issues that the working group would be considering, and it also gives a very good reason. Within all these working groups, we need people of different disciplines and backgrounds involved. But I would particularly like to stress that people who have got expertise in hidden discrimination or debates about what actually constitutes bias would be really welcome. So, for example, discussing whether or not something counts as bias towards a particular group is premised upon how different groups are identified. Because if you carve up the population into groups differently, you're going to get different results as to whether or not a certain outcome is biased. So all those issues I anticipate we're going to have to discuss in discussing whether or not something actually constitutes negative bias or something which is just part and parcel of how we're interacting with people.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Paul. That's really helpful. And like I said, thank you both of you in the sense of you both really helped me understand these issues. And now, just so folks know, if you want to start asking more questions in the text chat area, that'd be great. And also, I'll continue asking questions for the time we have remaining. David, I don't know if we can, but we got a great comment from Louis Terman. I can read it, but David, can you let me know, are we able to unmute Louis so he can talk about the IEEE SSIT Society?
Hey, John, it's David. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Unfortunately, we can't unmute Louis. If you want to go ahead and read his comment, I can provide contact information at the end of the comment.
Oh, that'd be great. Okay, well, Louis, Chairman was kind enough to say, and Louis, I'm reading what you sent. The IEEE SSIT Society has a very strong interest in the implications of technology, which includes ethics. Please contact Paul Cunningham. He's the current SSIT president for more details. And that's an excellent point. We all at the initiative are huge fans of the IEEE SSIT. I'm also myself a member. Greg Adamson, when Konstantinos at the beginning of this presentation was talking about all the great work at IEEE being done about ethics, Greg Adamson, who's the former president of SSIT before Paul, he is now leading a lot of wonderful ethics efforts, like Konstantinos mentioned before. So, David, I think you're going to put, or you already did, Paul's email address is pcunningham@IEEE.org, and I'll spell that. That's P as in Paul, CUNNINGHAM @IEEE.org. I also mentioned Greg Adamson, who is fantastic and doing so much work with ethics at IEEE. You can email Greg at g.adamson@IEEE.org. So thank you again, Louis, for that, and please do give our best to Paul, and we'll say the same to Greg if they aren't on the call. While we wait for some other questions in the chat room, let's see, I wanted to go back to Alan. And Alan, just for interest to have some cross-pollination, what's been your experience with algorithmic bias in your work, just since you've had such a rich and diverse background in both robotics and other areas of ethics?
Thanks, John. Actually, relatively little, I have to say, because I typically, so I'm a roboticist. I work on intelligent robots, and mostly those robots have not been built using deep learning systems. Although it is true that I built robots with artificial neural networks, which of course are really just the old-fashioned form of deep learning. But the bias, in a sense, turns out or exhibits itself as a behavioral bias. So in other words, robots that tend to always turn left rather than right, or have a tendency to turn left rather than turn right, are exhibiting a bias that was created because of the way that we trained or even evolved, if we use artificial evolution, the neural networks controlling those robots. So it's a different kind of bias, but not perhaps the kind you're thinking of, but there we go.
No, that's really helpful. And I know I interviewed, sort of along those lines, Stuart Russell, who is certainly one of my heroes in this space, and quite literally one of the authors of the most used textbooks on AI in the space.
Absolutely.
And I think it was for The Guardian. And he's the first person, I read this years ago, when he said, if you're going to be dealing with ethics and machines, whether it's whatever the different type of AI or machine learning or issues you're working with, he gave the example of a kitchen robot. If you're building like a companion robot that's supposed to go in the kitchen, it's very easy to think about it's going to have 10,000 recipes and it's going to be able to cook while doing this. And he said, but don't forget to teach it not to cook the cat. And when he told me that, besides laughing, I was like, what do you mean? And he said, well, people tend to forget, and this is the bias issue and kind of what you're talking about before, that robots or systems don't come in the same way that humans do in one sense, meaning when we're born, maybe it's on the playground, the first time we walk up to someone and maybe lightly punch them on the shoulder, and then we see them cry or they're upset. From the get-go as humans, we are encoded, as it were, with these ethical and moral sort of lessons that are so deeply embedded that sometimes it's easy to forget how hard it is to write them into code. Anyway, Alan, does that make sense?
It does, yes. I see, John, that we do have a question in the chat room.
Oh, great. Well, then, David, can you read the first question in the order received? Thanks, Alan.
Yeah, you got it, John. And they're pertinent questions to exactly what you guys are talking about. The first one comes through from Robbie Simpson. Thanks, Robbie. How will the requirements for transparency interact with deep learning and neural networks, given that their decisions are more organic? Would monitoring the inputs to these networks be sufficient? Go ahead, John.
Well, I'll leave that. Who among the three of you, Alan, Ansgar, Paula, who would like to answer that one?
Well, I can give a very quick answer, John, and then hand over to Ansgar and Paula. Certainly, transparency is a problem for so-called deep learning systems. There's no question that conventionally such systems are well known as being opaque. In other words, it's very hard to figure out why the network, once it's been trained, gives a particular outcome. In fact, AlphaGo famously tried to figure out why a particular winning move was made in one of the games with Lee Sedol, the Go player, and they couldn't figure it out. But really, my challenge to companies like DeepMind is, hey guys, you're smart. Surely you can invent a system that does allow deep learning systems to explain themselves.
Ansgar, Paula, do you have anything to add to that?
Sorry, no. Well, I'm a philosopher. It's outside my realm of expertise, I'm afraid.
All right.
So, one thing I would perhaps like to add to this is that
Yes, deep learning is a difficult system as far as transparency is concerned. But to a large extent, this has perhaps less to do with the learning aspect than it does with the high dimensionality aspect of it. Because if you simplify a deep learning system down to a very simple one that has just a couple of nodes in each level, it becomes not that difficult to try to do transparency for it if you've only got two potential inputs that you're weighing against each other. But because these deep learning systems tend to use a very big set of possible patterns, etc., that is where a lot of the transparency problem comes from. And because a lot of the transparency problem is due to really the high dimensionality of systems, this problem transfers also to non-learning kinds of systems, as long as they are high-dimensional kinds of big data types of situations. Even if it's a traditional if-then kind of based rule system, if you add 300 plus rules in there, then you can say, yes, I can write down the rule for you, but will you understand why this particular choice came out if there are 300 different parameters involved? So transparency, to my mind at least, is often one of the big challenges, is that the modern systems allow us to mine huge data sets, which is one of the reasons why they become capable of doing things that otherwise they wouldn't be able to. But just the vastness of the data that's being used in the decision-making makes it very difficult to humanly grasp why this particular decision follows out of this particular kind of set of inputs.
Awesome. Thank you, Ansgar. I think we have time maybe for one more question, and I'm so sorry we don't have time for more. It's just all this great content. David, can you read the next question, and whoever gets to answer it, maybe a 2-minute response.
You got it, John. I'll just throw it out there from William Ratcliffe. Thanks, William, for the question. Are there any efforts to understand or model human values, societal values, etc., being one of the characteristics in any of the efforts that you guys have going on?
Alan, you want to start with that?
Well, I think the short answer, great question, is that there are. In fact, one of the other committees in the IEEE Global Initiative is called Imbuing Ethics. And it's really concerned with how, and it's a very difficult, in a sense, both technical and philosophical problem. It's addressing the problem of how it is that we can, if you like, encode sets of human values in such a way that you can embed those values into autonomous systems. Very difficult problem, but the short answer is yes, it's something that one of the committees in the initiative is working on.
Awesome. Thanks, Alan. David, I think we have time for maybe one more quick question, and thank you to everyone who's been asking the questions. If we don't get to you, you can see I have my email address up. You can feel free to email me if we didn't get a chance to get to you. But David, what's the last question?
You got it, John. It comes from Les Oaks. Les, thanks for the question. Les asks, what efforts are being made to automation system manufacturers to get them on board with the ethics issue? Are there any enticements being proposed? And I'll end it on that.
That's a great question. I can respond, but I'm going to let that maybe see if Ansgar, Paula, Alan, do you guys want to respond first?
I think it's one for the directors of the initiative. I'm sorry to pass the buck, but
yeah. No, that's okay. Konstantinos, are you still there? I know it's last minute, so I think Konstantinos is still with us. I can respond to that, but if you're there, Konstantinos, feel free to unmute if you want to respond. It's a great question about enticement, and like any standard, once it's finished, the market, as it were, really decides if a standard is something that's going to be adopted. That said, what we talk a lot about, and Kay says this beautifully, is we use a term called ethics is the new green. And by that, we're sort of referring to sustainability when it started about 10 years ago in the corporate world was really about the environment. How can brands, where they sort of are asked to take care of the environment, along with doing their due diligence to help the environment, also define their brand around the pillars and the values of how they decide to take care of the environment. Similarly, now, as we say, it used to be, or it's still about the planet, but it's also about people, where these different autonomous and AI-oriented standards with these ethical considerations come into play. The hope and the encouragement is that where you are showing the extra due diligence to really understand end user values, but also to think about the new aspects of safety that really are being introduced with some of these amazing new technologies. It gives the opportunity for anyone creating them, the technologists, the engineers, and the brands, to say this is how we are working with these standards to go the extra mile to define how we can, as it were, think about the sustainability of people's well-being and to prioritize it. And with that, although I hate to do so, just because we have so many amazing speakers, and this is such, it's always hard for me as the moderator to end these talks. But I'll wrap up just to honor your time. I want to say a couple of thank yous to folks at IEEE. I want to say thanks to Susan England Lutz and to Noel Dominic, to Mark Vasquez, people who were really helpful getting this together and putting together the deck for IEEE. Also, a huge thank you, of course, to David Stankiewicz, who is our technical host here today. As you can see on this last slide here, please feel free to reach out to me at john.havens.us@IEEE.org if we missed or didn't get a chance to answer your question. And especially, we would love it if, we hope it's been a little taste here of just two of the amazing working groups that have been created around this different work from IEEE. And it's something where, of course, as Constantine has pointed out, these standards really happen because of you, meaning people who join the working groups in a consensus-building way. So I'm John Havens. David, I'll throw it back to you to close, and just want to say thank you again to everyone who participated and joined today. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks, John. And I'll just second John's comments. Thanks to everybody who joined. Thank you to the guest speakers. One final note, as I mentioned at the start, we have recorded today's session, so we'll make the video recording available on demand, as well as the PowerPoint slide deck for everybody to enjoy. We'll email all those details to all registered attendees. Have a great day, everybody. Appreciate your time.